The laptop must be highly, highly sensitive. Your PowerPoint presentation.
Why?
The joys of technology, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Stop that. There must be a timing thing on the transition.
Hi, Tom. How are you doing? I don't know if you're on mute, but we can't hear you.
No, on the webinar, we can't hear anybody. Hi, Tom. How are you keeping?
Okay. Everybody's muted at the moment, are
Yeah.
they? Okay.
Just people are starting to join. Hi, Tom. Hi, Sarah. I know we can't hear you at the moment, but just bear with us. We're just setting up a couple of things here on screen. We'll be running now in just a moment, so please bear with us.
Hi, Paige. Hi, Sarah.
Alina's there as well. So let's have a look here. Just give it one more second, guys, and then we'll jump on. Unfortunately for everybody, my camera's not working, so you can't see me. That's the problem I'm going through here. So just bear with me just for a little longer. We just give everybody a chance to jump on before we kick off.
Hi, Alina.
Now let's see what I can see. No, I'm not getting anything here. So look, what I'll do is let's kick off the meeting anyway, Sarah. So
okay.
So to kick off, before I try and transfer it over, so hi everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today for the webinar on Sicon Distribution for Sage 200. My name's Howard Murphy. You can't see me, but trust me, I'm here. Business Development Manager for DB Computer Solutions. Sarah Vickers from Sicon joins us this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, who'll be running through the features of Sicon Distribution. I'm not going to spend too much longer here. I'll just give you a brief idea why people actually look at Sicon Distribution. So if you feel your company's grown beyond the standard kind of functionality of Sage 200 stock, sales order process, purchase order process modules, then Sicon Distribution might be a solution for you here. So companies that generally have an interest in this particular Sicon module are often businesses that have a requirement for things like large multi-location style warehouses, complex stock control, anything that requires serial batch numbers, expiry dates, have a high volume of inbound, outbound stock movements, or a need for sort of advanced pricing around some of your stock items. Sarah will elaborate further. I just wanted to touch on some of the basics, if that's all right, Sarah. So she'll be giving you an overview of the product today, but we'd be very happy to organize a one-to-one session where we can properly talk to you about your business, offer you a fuller demonstration based on the specific requirements you have. So before I hand you over to Sarah, I'd remind you to put forward any questions through the Q&A facility via Teams or through the chat, and we'll do our level best to give you answers at the end of the session. I'd also point out that if your shared screen is too small, I'd ask you hit select view at the top of the screen, choose focus on content together with other options for show the full screen, give you the best view possible. So that's it. I'm going to hand you over to Sarah now, and then I'll pick up towards the end. I'll probably have a couple of questions throughout. Sarah might interject here and there, but for the most part, anybody else, put your questions through, and I'll pass it over to yourself. Thanks.
That's lovely. Thank you, Howard. Well, I think we're literally just into good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Literally, we're just there, Howard, aren't we? So hopefully, is everybody seeing my screen? Howard, is that coming through okay?
I can see it perfectly here. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. So as Howard was just explaining, distribution basically provides an extension of the core standard Sage functionality. So great for organizations that want to manage their stock in a more efficient way. Now, you'll see on the far left-hand side, and by the way, today is just kind of high level, briefly dipping into some of the functionality just to give you a feel and a flavour and kind of the main things that most customers tend to want to be looking at. But as Howard suggested, if you think that these are the kind of things that might be appropriate to you, then of course we can do a one-to-one and we can do a deeper dive for you. Okay. So moving along then, distribution, as you can see on that far left-hand corner, just basically sits as an integrated module inside of Sage 200. Now, what you'll see me do shortly is either dipping into standard Sage screens where we've added some extra fields or functionality. So we're just extending the core functionality to add our features in. Where there isn't a screen that Sage provide, that's where you'll start to see me dip into the distribution module itself. So first things first, you'll see on the far left-hand corner that distribution is made up of a number of different modules. So you decide on the functionality that's relevant to you, and then obviously those will be the modules that you buy. And of course, those will be the modules that you'll see on the left-hand side. So they're made up of sales order processing management, which we're going to start off with, future sales, container management, pot management, pre-allocations, reserves and call-offs, stock matrix, warehouse, and there's also material planning, which we'll dip into later on as well for you. So what we'll try and do is kind of give you the flow as if you were putting a sales order on right the way through to shipping, and pick up on those really annoying things that you might be doing on Excel at the moment or trying to improve on your efficiency. So let's start off with the stock management element first of all, and I'm going to come into standard Sage sales order processing. So as I mentioned a moment ago, where we can, we will always add in additional functionality to the standard Sage screens because of course it makes it an awful lot easier for you. So some of the functionality that we provide as part and parcel of stock management, as you'll see in a moment when my sales order processing screen opens up, if you bear with me, it's like me first thing in the morning. It takes a little while to get going until it's had its coffee. Right, there we go. So the first thing, as you can see, is that we give you a little extra pop-up box that shows you any undispatched sales orders. So let's say I've just put a few orders on for a customer and they come back and they go, oh, I'm really sorry, I forgot to add XYZ on. Instead of me adding a new order on, it could be that I come in and see, well, actually, we have got some orders of yours that we haven't dispatched yet. I'll just amend it and I'll tag it onto that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we've also got the ability to pop up, although I've now turned it off, we've also got an extra pop-up that can pull through customer specific notes, as well as the delivery and invoice address and the analysis code. So it just means I'm not having to come into these separate tabs to make any changes. There's an extra pop-up, but as I said, I've just turned that off now. Now, the next thing that we've got, if I just quickly add something on, and I'm going to use my go-to, unfortunately, my good old coffee machine, as poor old Howard will concur. It's usually my go-to when I'm doing demos. So bless him, I'm sure he's sick to death of me seeing my demos now.
The minute you said coffee.
You just knew, didn't you? You just
Yeah.
knew it had to be. Right. So the first thing that we give you is this little extra distribution button, which basically means when I'm putting an order on, I have real-time visibility of my stock. Now, we know what salespeople like. Sometimes they'll go, oh, yes, Mr. Customer, you can have that, because they can see the stock on the shelf. But what they might not appreciate is that stock that's sitting on the shelf might actually be a requirement for another customer. It might be allocated for another customer. So the information that we are presenting here is just about giving them that real-time visibility. So don't go over committing and telling the customer that you could dispatch it today when in reality that might not be available. So the first bits of that information is this little stock balances screen. So I can see by individual warehouse and you can see by individual bin location, perhaps any orders that are coming in. So even if I don't have an order coming in, or sorry, I don't have any stock on the shelf, at least I could drill back to see, well, actually, I can see that we have got an order coming in and I can see when it's going to come in. We'll come and talk about container tracking and being able to update when that's actually going to come in later on. So that confirmed tab links into our container tracking, which we'll come and talk about earlier on. So again, another association to, well, if a purchase order hasn't been confirmed, I really don't want to be overcommitting and telling the customer that it's going to come in, whereas in reality, our purchasing team haven't confirmed that it's definitely going to land on that date. So ignore works orders, because I think that for the majority of you, you're not in manufacturing. Yes, of course, I can see what's sitting on the shelf, but in reality, some of that might already be allocated, whether it's to reserve stock. And again, we'll come and talk about reserves and call-offs as another element of distribution later on. Or it could be that we've allocate it to some sales orders. So I've got a mixture of sales orders here with the customers. And again, I can drill in to see that information. And then what do I actually physically have available? So it's about, as I said, that ability to see what's actually available. I've also got some other quick drill down so I can see stock history and things like previous sales orders. Now, the other thing that we can do is we can report on lost orders. Now, this could be at a sales quote stage. So we've got exactly the same pop-up where you can record the fact that it was lost, and you can record whatever reason you like, by the way, in that drop-down box. Don't take any notice of what I've put in there. You can have whatever reasons you like. And then, of course, you can report on it. But the other thing that you'll see later on is when we're managing how much minimum stock level we should be keeping on the shelf, actually should we be keeping more because we're losing orders? So that's information is also presented when we're evaluating how much minimum stock levels we should be holding. So again, we'll come and tie in with that later on for you. So we're going to get this order on, and the next thing that you see, not to be mixed up with complementary. I always get my complementary and complementary mixed up. Complementary, we're still charging, but what we're doing here is just saying, look, don't forget to add on some espresso cups. So at the same time as we're selling them a coffee machine, we're trying to do a bit of upselling here. And I'm saying I'm going to add on 5 of those as well at the same time. So it's just going to automatically add those on at the same time for me. Now, I'm not going to go into this bit in too much detail. We'll talk about this when we come to talk about reserves, but you'll see it's flagging the fact that we've got some reserve stock already for coffee cups for this particular customer. So do I want to reduce the reserves? But as I said, we'll come and talk about that in a bit more depth in detail later. So I've got my espresso machine and I've got my espresso cup. Now, I don't know how relevant this other option is, but if you have customers that are sending you Excel spreadsheets of their orders, we can do a quick copy and paste. Literally, we copy the Excel spreadsheet and it will automatically upload every single line from your Excel spreadsheet. So it's a really quick and simplistic way of getting orders on instead of having to add them individually. So I'm going to save that, and you'll see once we save that, if I then come into my distribution module now, right, this is part of our enhancement pack. So it's just automatically put the order on hold because it's spotted the fact that you don't have a price on that. So I'm going to put it on hold until you change that. So I'm going to say yes, and we're going to still process that, and that's going to pop that on as a sales order. Right, so we've got our sales order on now. But as we know, sometimes it can be quite difficult to manage the orders that we've got in and who should be having what stock and who should we be allocating that stock to. So we have this very simplistic manage stock back orders. So all we're basically doing here is saying, show me all of the orders that are on the system that still have something to be dispatched. Now, I could filter that by sales order, I could filter that by customer, by supplier, or by any one of those filter dates. Or as I'm about to do, I'm going to just say, show me all of the orders in the system with the quantity outstanding. And then very simply, I can allocate however much I want out of that remaining quantity, but it's showing me, sorry, let me just move the camera out of the way. It's showing me how much free stock I have available. So again, it's just making it really simple for you to say, okay, well, what stock can we allocate? Well, clearly I can't allocate any of those rosewood packing there because we don't have enough stock available. Now, in addition to allocating stock, I can also unallocate stock. So if we need to shift stock around, we can do that in a really simplistic way. So if we've got a more urgent order coming in and that other customer that we've allocated the stock to can wait a little while, this just gives me that ability really simply to unallocate. And I've got that same, if I come to that distribution module, I've got that same stock item balances, previous orders that we had against the sales order. So this again is about showing you all the information that you need in order to do your job in a simplistic fashion. Instead of having to close screens and go into another one, it's all accessible in that same screen, basically. Now, we can also do things like, as I said, do our inquiries on our lost orders. So if we want to have a look at how many lost orders we've had, I can see all of that in the screen and report on it. And then we can do things like set up salespeople's user permission. So, how much can they add on and can they do discounts and things like that. And we can put markup pricing as well. So essentially the whole idea is instead of, so if I come to a customer as an example here, I can say, do I want to put a markup pricing against our product codes, our product category, should I say, and what is that percentage? And it will just automatically apply that percentage for you. So that's SOP management, nice and simple. Let's move on to future sales. Now, I alluded to the fact that we could manage that, what our minimum stock levels could be earlier on. Now, what I often find with customers is that they'll set Sage up, they'll set their minimum stock levels, and it's never reviewed because it's too much of a hassle to go into every single line and change the minimum stock level or export it and report on how much those levels are. So we have a very simplistic way in order to manage that process. And don't worry if you're in a seasonal kind of trend. So you might have maybe September is a high period for you where you're doing lots of sales. And then after summer, that's when the sales drop off. I can filter by a specific date range, or I can filter by specific stock items or manufacturers, product groups, or suppliers. So if I wanted to look at a specific product group or a specific stock item, I could do. I don't have to do what I'm actually doing and say, look at everything. And this is where I wish I had have said, just give me one product item. It's like watching a boiling kettle is pulling through every single stock
as
item.
It all comes through.
I do it every single time, Howard. I go and click on it and I get carried away and I think, oh, I've done it again. I should have clicked on just one stock item. Right, what's happening in the background, though, is it's looking at, as you'll see in a second, the average monthly demand over the last 2 years, over the last year, and the last 3 months. So it gives us an understanding on how much have we sold, how much have we bought, those lost orders that I mentioned earlier on, and potentially usage if you're using our kitting module where perhaps you're packaging things up together as an example. And then it's going to make a suggestion of what it thinks you should be changing. Now, when I say changing, that could actually be a decrease. You'd be amazed how many of our customers hold too much stock. So that's taking up valuable storage space and, of course, valuable cash flow. So this can affect actually whether you should be reducing your stock holding or just leave it as it is, or perhaps you need to be increasing it, as I said. Now, it's not going to change anything until you click that button at the bottom, and it will then make those changes. And again, as you'll see in a second, I've still got the capacity to change that. I don't have to go with what it's telling me. So this is a really useful tool. And if I come into that little hyperlink there, so it's telling me that I did an average of 23.08 of these cable glands, 0.8, I don't know where it's getting 0.8 from, but there we go. So can you see I can drill down to see my purchases? Well, clearly we had an exceptional month in July. Again, we can look at our sales, any lost orders, and as I was talking about earlier on, perhaps if you're using our kitting module to bundle packages, things up together, we can look at usage as well. But it gives us some analysis to say, okay, well, clearly if we had an exceptional month in July, I really don't want to be making a massive change because that was a bit of an exceptional scenario. So I might not go with the one, let's come back to that one I was referring to here. I might not go with an increase of 2, I might drop it down to 1. And then, as I said, all I do is select all, click update, and it will then revise what that minimum stock levels ought to be. And as you'll then see shortly, when we come to running suggested purchase orders, of course, when we're using an automated system that tells us, well, how much should I be buying? If it's basing it on minimum stock levels, you really need that minimum stock level to be as accurate as you possibly can get it. So running this first will make sure that that suggested purchase orders is as accurate as you can possibly get it. Okay. Now, I can also drill down to see my balances as well. So I can have a look to see just like you saw earlier on, where my stock's at, so what's coming in, what's going out again. And it also shows you the calculation as well. So it shows us how that's come to that calculation. So we work on a safety margin, lead time. You can change all of those, by the way. So you can say, well, what is our stock coverage? Do we want to put a less of a margin in and less of a lead time? Okay. So that's the calculate minimum stock levels. But we also find a lot of customers who, when they run when they run suggested purchase orders and they're trying to manage their stock levels, because they have stock coming in from abroad with very, very long lead time, that can make the assessment of how much they should be ordering quite difficult. Time and time again, when I've talked to customers, it's usually a member of staff that's been in the business for years and years, and he's got his good old Excel spreadsheet and his knowledge in his head and a rough idea how much he should be buying because it's his experience. And Howard, as you know, talking to customers over the years, that's great. As long as that person doesn't leave the business or, he's on a holiday. What happens then? The business is reliant very much on that one person. So what this is doing is giving the tools to the business to still be able to do that without the reliance upon that one person. So what this is basically doing is it's giving us an understanding of any seasonal fluctuations and where we might have increased or decreased from a purchasing again and an availability of our stock. So you'll see in a second, again, I can filter it by a date range if we do have seasonal trends. I can filter it by a stock item. I can filter it by product group as well if I wanted to. So what this is going to do, it's going to give me what my average usage is to give me an assessment of whether I should be actually adding more of a forecast. So when we run material planning, that bases it on minimum stock level and orders on the system, and obviously your suppliers lead time, as you'll see shortly. But actually, should we be buying more? Especially if we've got very, very long lead times. So that's where this additional forecasting can help you as a tool. And again, when it's done its stuff. So you'll see there's various drill downs in a second that help me evaluate, where that information is coming from. And then very simply, I can generate that as a forecast. And that can be added into material planning as an additional demand for stock. So actually, whilst that's still running, what I'm going to do, because I'm quite mindful of time, is I'm going to come into material planning. So this will start to make a little bit more sense. So material planning is great for customers. I often find that customers look at material planning and the solutions that they look at are designed for manufacturing companies, whereas we understood many years ago that customers wanted to do material planning, but they didn't need all of the extra bits that most material planning tools gave them because it was a manufacturing solution. So we stripped back on all those requirements. And you'll see if I actually take out, sorry, mine does include the whole manufacturing requirements because it looks exactly the same. Let's do that. Right, so what we've done is we've stripped back the manufacturing requirements in a material planning tool, and we've given you the functionality to make suggestions of what it thinks you need to be ordering. And as I said, ignore suggested works orders. Sorry, I thought I'd turn that off because that's not going to be relevant for you. So what this is doing is it's running through that new updated minimum stock level that we talked about earlier on. It's looking at your preferred supplier's lead time, and it's looking at any sales orders that you've got on the system to make suggestions on what it thinks that you need to be ordering. So the first thing that it's going to do is if you have some maybe bulk locations and you want to move stock from a bulk location, that could be a third-party distributor, and you want to move from that bulk location to your own location or a smaller dispatching location, we can make suggestions to move that stock. And all of this links to our barcoding module, by the way, so we can create stock transfers electronically for you. I don't think we've got any food manufacturers or anything of that kind of nature, so we'll skip over that. I was just looking at the names of the organisations that are on the session, although I will mention it just in case this happens to be relevant for anybody that's watching the recording. So what we can also do is flag any items that have expired. So this doesn't necessarily need to be food. It's any form of batch traceability where you've got a sell by date or an expiry date. So you'll see here, it's giving me a list of all of the items that have expired with a specific detail. So that's the next thing that we can do. What we're then going to be looking at in a moment when it's run its routine is the suggested purchase orders, but this is only a suggestion. I think a lot of customers tend to be a little reticent to use material planning because, you know, they worry that, oh, it's going to generate purchase orders and I lose control. That's not the case at all, as you'll see in a second. You still have full control of what you produce as a purchase order. Nothing gets produced until you click that button. And you can even still go into the PO itself and amend it if you wanted to before you send it to the supplier. And you've even got the ability to change the supplier. So if you know that there's a shortage of stock, as an example, for one supplier, you've got the ability to change that supplier all from within that same screen as well. Now, one of the things that we do, as you'll see in a second, so I'm really wishing I thought I turned that suggested works orders off, and it's in fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out of that and take that off just to speed things up a little bit. Bear with me. Let me untick suggested works orders. There we go. And that will run an awful lot quicker then. Okay. So one of the things that you'll see in a second, which a lot of customers really value, is a drill down to show you where it's making that suggestion from. So why is it suggesting that you need to buy that quantity? Well, it breaks down what's coming in and what's coming out, and therefore why you need to be making that suggestion. And the other thing that we can do, again, as you'll see shortly, is if there is any kind of sign off or approval that's required, we also have another application called Purchase Requisition Approvals. That's a web portal, and it can run on a mobile app that can send that out for authorization, and any number of people can sign off on it before it generates a purchase order. So that's where we can start to link to some of our other applications. So any second now, as you can see, it's just checking some dates. There we go. So these are the suggestions of purchase orders that it's come up with. So as we said, it's looking at the lead time of the supplier, when we're going to need it for. Now, I could say combine all of the same lines for the same purchase order together, or actually, where we have the same supplier, split it to separate purchase orders. Entirely up to you. We can also pull through where relevant the supplier's part number. So if the supplier part is different to your own, we can add that automatically onto the purchase order as well for you. We've got those same stock item balances to give you the same information that you saw before, but we also have this little historical analysis on how much have you purchased to date, month to date, year to date, and the last 12 months. And this is where I was saying we also have a reason. So I can drill down to understand that's not the greatest example. Let me see if I can get another example that has a little bit more information. No, I'm determined to find one that has a little bit more data. Does that one have a little bit more data? So you can see it's showing that that's perfect. Actually, that's exactly what I was looking for. That's a perfect suggestion, actually. So it's what we call our inners and outers, nothing to do with a dance routine. So you'll see that it's showing you what our current free stock is. So as I mentioned earlier on, free stock is net of any allocations or demand. So this is what you've actually got available free. But we're also looking at what's coming in and out. So yes, you've got a couple of purchase orders coming in. Now, this is the forecast that I generated in a previous run. So where I've added additional forecasts, I can see very clearly that they're forecasted stock demand. So you know what, I might not want to include that, or again, I might want to lower it. And we're also taking into account any reserve stock, which we'll come and talk about earlier on. So if we want to buy some stock for certain customers, we've got a method of being able to do that very, very simply as well. So what we're basically doing, as I said, is we're looking at our minimum stock level. We're looking potentially, as I said, any reserve stock, as well as any minimum order quantity for your preferred suppliers, because let's face it, there's no point in you generating a purchase order for one of these items, port plugs, if in reality your supplier has a minimum order quantity for 5. So we'll even take that into account and we'll up it to 5 for you. It's going to tell you the earliest date that that's likely to come in based on your preferred supplier's lead time. Now, whilst we're in this screen, I may as well pick up on these little triggers that are showing on the left-hand side, because what we're also doing is we're pulling through another module inside of our distribution called container tracking. So we'll come and show you that in a little bit more depth and detail in a moment, but this is basically flagging to me that there's a problem. So we all remember a couple of years ago when that ship got stuck in the Suez Canal and it caused absolute mayhem and chaos for everybody. How would you keep track in Sage of what's going to happen to those shipments coming in? You can't, is the answer. There's absolutely no place in Sage to keep track of that, is there, Howard?
Yeah.
So I think it's fair to say when I talk to customers, most of those customers tend to have again, good old manual Excel spreadsheet. Well, where were we before Excel spreadsheets?
It's either that or they'll put in some sort of comments or notes somewhere else, but it's not really relevant to the specific, like you say, transaction or what have you.
Exactly. And of course, if they're keeping that information, nobody else gets to see it in the business. Whereas what we're trying to do is share that information. So you'll see in a moment that I can add some tracking notes if there's a problem, and I can pop in the updated receive date. But all that's happening here, it's just warning me, well, yes, you've got a couple of purchase orders coming in, but clearly there was a problem with them. So we had a red flag to show me that there's a delay on that one, and I've got an orange one on that one to show there's a delay on that one, but not as bad as the red one. So it's about pulling all of that information together to help me determine what I need to be ordering. And then very simply, all we do is we select all, and as I'll come and show you in a moment, we can then generate a purchase order, and it saves me the hassle, the time of me having to manually key in a purchase order. Or of course do manual stock takes. That's usually the other thing I often hear from customers, is what they'll tend to do is do daily or weekly stock takes of all of their items to get an idea of what stock they've got and what's left in order to determine what they should be buying. You really don't need to be doing all of that on a regular basis anymore, because obviously that's the whole purpose of this automation in material planning, is it's looking at all of that data holistically for you to give you that recommendation as to what it thinks you should be buying. And just coming back to recommendations, just to show you there again, I can override that. And as I mentioned, I can even change the supplier. So this is just simply showing me all of my suppliers on Sage, so I can change it to any supplier at this stage. Now, I also mentioned that we have the ability to create a requisition. So if you need to control the production of those purchase orders before they get placed with a supplier, this is the mechanism to do that. And again, I'm finding more and more customers are now starting to do that. So what they don't want is people buying stock until the accounts department check that there's sufficient enough cash flow. So this is a really good way of managing that process. So I can either lock that down, which means I can only create a requisition and that will work through approvals, pings an email, sign off, and then it produces a purchase order in standard Sage POP. Now, I'm just going to quickly generate a couple in here, and you'll see when I create my purchase order, as I said, I could create all of them. What it's now going to do is create my purchase order, and essentially, as I said, I'm not having to manually key on purchase orders. It just does it all automatically for me in a couple of seconds. So there we go. There's my first purchase order. Now, one of the things that I think is particularly helpful for customers is the fact that we then link it by showing you that little material planning tab as to why you're ordering it. So if there is a delay in this item coming in, then we know which orders that might affect. Well, as it happens, this was only for minimum stock suggestions, but actually, if this was for customers' orders, I need to know which customer orders that was going to be for, so I can preempt there's going to be a problem and I can contact the customer. So if that item was purchased for multiple reasons, all of those reasons would be listed in here, including the customer order number. As I said, we'll come back to the tracking tab later on. I'll come back to that in a second. So there's my first one, and then there's my second one. As easy as that. Okay. Now, while I'm in here, let me just pull through AB cookers. Right, let me filter by AB cookers. The other thing that we can do while we're in here is we've also got the ability to link these purchase orders to a container. So this is Container Manager. Again, another module that I'll come back into in a second and show you in distribution. So there's two main benefits of Container Manager. The one is tracking, which I've mentioned, and the other is, have we exceeded the volume and the weight of that container? So for any of you who are perhaps bringing containers in, and it's your responsibility to make sure that you don't exceed the volume and the weight. I don't know if you can see there, it's in green. So clearly I haven't exceeded the total volume and weight, so I'm okay. I can link it to a container. I've just got a 20-foot container on there, but of course you can have as many different sizes containers as you like. So I could decide to, yeah, we'll link that to the container and we're happy to link it. Or, as I'll show you now, bear with me. If I come into container tracking now, back in distribution, this is where I have the ability to add my purchase order lines on. So these are all my containers that are coming in. And if I come into that last one, so we can see the container number, the requested date, the actual delivery date, the total weight and volume of those containers. So all we've done in the background is we've got some extra fields that allows us to add the weight and the volume of your stock items in Sage. So of course that makes it then really easy for us to help you determine if you have actually exceeded the weight and the volume. And then the tracking of that. So if I come and show you, and this can be done in the purchase order as well, by the way. So I can come in here and I can add as many container lines as I like. So I can say, show me all of the outstanding purchase orders, or filter it by a specific supplier, or filter it by a stock item or a purchase order. And then very simply, I can just add that line on, and it will then, I don't know if you saw that, it would just warn me that it's now overloaded. So just by adding that extra line on, I've overloaded it. So I can remove that, and we're all okay again. So removed, this is just a little tracking functionality. So removed, not tracking, removed line. So we're okay now. Now, we've also, as I'll come and show you in a second, I can also add those lines in purchase order processing as well. So as we're adding the PO on, I can either create a new container and link it, or link it to an existing container that I've already got. So that's one of the bits of functionality, but I think the main one, if I'm honest, that most customers tend to really want container management for is this container tracking, which we were talking about earlier on. So I've just set up a very simple tracking profile template. You can have as many templates as you like. So if you think about all the different countries and the different suppliers that you're getting these from, and all I've basically done is said, when I have a container coming in from China, that's essentially the process that it has to go through, and therefore the provisional number of days that it's going to take for that item to land. And it's just worked out the delivery date for me. But as we know, how many times a container is delayed for whatever reason. So this is about giving you that flexibility to add and update the actual dates, mark it as confirmed. So do you remember one of the first screens I showed you in sales order processing was a little drill down? So whilst I'm talking to the customer, I can see if that PO has been confirmed or not. I can mark it as confirmed. I can even pop in some notes in here and we can mark some problems. And as you saw earlier on, we can color code those so they can then pull through into that material planning screen. So it makes it really easy for anybody in the business to now see, well, actually, there is a delay on that container. And again, we can add the tracking against each line. So if you have a purchase order with multiple lines that are going on different containers, I have the ability to update each line as well. So it's just a really simple way of keeping track of all of that. So I can attach documentation, I can attach memos, and we can even record if we've got a deposit against that. So yeah, we're going to update our PO lines, and then I have the ability then to be able to book in the whole of the container. Again, if you're receiving a container in Sage, there is no way to acknowledge that it's a container. As you know, you've got to book in every single purchase order and every single purchase order line, whereas we can say, actually, we'll just simply receive the whole of the container. As long as it's as we're expecting, we can receive the whole of that container in, basically, or receive certain lines against each container. So again, much more efficient, much easier as well. I can mark it as part received if I wanted to, and of course I can do our usual GRN, which of course will automatically update your PO in standard Sage. So talking about POs, I mentioned, bear with me 2 seconds, let's come back to that purchase order. If I actually went the right way, it would help, bear with me. So we talked about that purchase order that we've just added on. If I wanted to link that purchase order to a container, oh no, I want to amend, not create a new one, sorry. So this is where, as you saw a moment ago, I do have a tracking tab in here. So it doesn't have to be in the container. So I can do exactly the same in here, but I've also got the ability to update each line with its own tracking and container as well. So this is where I was saying I can link it to a container, add a container, and I've also got the ability to do my container tracking in here as well. So when are we expecting it? Have we confirmed the delivery date? So if we're only receiving one line against that PO, I've got that ability to update that line specifically. So that is basically container management in a nutshell. Right. Let's continue with the rest of the modules in distribution. In fact, let me finish off on that sales order forecasting. Perfect. So let's choose a line. So we've got some information, shall we? So I'm going to drill into that. So a couple of things. I have the ability to see what that figure is made up of. So it's showing me that there was 158 of cable glands in August. Okay, well, what is that figure made up of? Well, actually, in reality, we only had one sales order go out with 2, and we also had some internal issues as well. As it happens, those were to works orders, so that's not going to be as relevant for you. So you're more likely to see sales orders, but maybe stock movement as well. So if we've moved stock between locations, we'd see that as well. But I've also got the ability to drill down and see the information. I don't know if you can see there, again, it's color coded. So I can see how many sales orders in a month, any issues, customers free of charge, did we return to supplier? So it's breaking it down basically, but it's also showing me where we've had an anomaly. So there, we've got a bit of an anomaly. It's highlighting to me in red that actually that's more than we usually have in a month. So I can generate a forecast from this to say, if I actually highlight the right line, it would help. Sorry, my apologies. So I'm going to generate a forecast now. And it's telling me that we've had a forecast change of 0.12, and therefore we need to increase how much stock that we purchase. So I'm going to say purchasing for July, although we're still in June, but it doesn't matter. View forecasts, and all that's going to happen now is that's going to generate me an additional demand. So do you remember you saw earlier on that those lots of red lines? this is where that information is coming from, basically. So this is saying we think you need to be actually adding some additional demand for stock, as well as your minimum stock levels. So again, it's looking at everything more holistically for you. Right, let's come and quickly cover up a few other things for you. So pot management. Very simply, the first main thing that customers use pot management for is looking at expected delivery. So what's still to come. So I've got my order number, the supplier name and the stock item and the order quantity, and then very simply, how much have we received? And again, I've got that confirmed, so I can do the confirmed in here as well as the tracking tab. But if I need to chase the supply, this is, I can't tell you, the added bonus of having a supplier telephone number in here, instead of me having to come out of the screen, go into the purchase ledger to find it. So we can pull through the supplier telephone number if you do need to chase that supplier. Okay, so this just gives you the ability to see what outstanding orders are in the system, expected deliveries. Now, the other thing that a lot of customers tend to find quite handy is something called a priceless quantity break. So if you have a supplier that have agreed some special pricing for you, let's edit that and give you an example. I've just basically said, when we buy from AB Cookers and we buy some cable glands, they've given us a price of £60 if we buy a quantity of 10 or more. But if we buy 50 or more, the price reduces to 50, 100 reduces to 30, and so on and so forth. So once you set those up, those prices will automatically pull through onto the purchase order for you, as well as into material planning. So you don't need to worry about keeping track of that. Once you've set it up, it will just pull that through automatically. So that's quite a handy tool if that's relevant for you. Now we can also do stock inspection. So if against an item you always went to make sure that they're checked before you dispatch them, we can lock the stock item down to ensure that you can't pick it and you certainly can't dispatch it unless it's passed its inspection. So very simplistic pass and fail, and if it fails, it goes into a dedicated quarantine location. And we do have an extension of this in our barcoding solution where we can ask some additional questions. Unfortunately, we don't have questions in this section. So if you did want a little bit more functionality around that stock inspection, it might be an idea to have a look at our barcoding solution. Oh, sorry, Howard, were you about to ask?
No, I was going to say, and just to point out, there's a couple of things that we've mentioned throughout the actual demonstration. We've done similar videos specifically around them. So I'll put a link in the chat just for our general channel for different videos, and you can pick and choose from there. Or if you want to email me directly, if there's anything specific you're looking for, let me know.
Perfect, thank you. Right, I'm mindful of the time and still loads to go through, so I need to whiz on, don't I? Sorry. Getting carried away in my usual manner, Howard.
You're
okay,
all right.
So KPIs as KPIs. Again, this is something that customers are starting to find really beneficial. So it's a really simplistic way of recording, are you getting your deliveries on time, basically? So you set what you consider to be on time, early, slightly late. And it just gives you the reporting tool to be able to have the conversation with your suppliers as to, well, why are we consistently getting late deliveries, or maybe even early? You know, you really don't want early deliveries. If you've requested it for 2 weeks and they deliver it a week early, that's cash flow impact, and that's obviously warehouse space taking up that you don't want. So I've just simply set up what I deem to be early, slightly late, and late in the background with my little color coding as well. And you'll see that it's just simply pulling through a summary for me as to how many of my lines have been early on time, slightly late, and therefore the KPI. But I can also drill into that supplier and see, well, which items have we found have been, again, early, on time, slightly late. So are there specific things that tend to be we're having a problem with? But I can also view the order lines as well. So I can drill in and have a look at those order lines. So I'm sure back in COVID times, yeah, there we go. Back in COVID times, we had definitely had problems there. So it just does this all automatically for you. When you book it in, it's going to record the information in the background. So all you need to do is basically set up what you deem to be, as I said, slightly late, early, late, and it just does it all automatically for you. So it's then giving you that tool to do that. And you've also got the kind of the monthly breakdown as well, summary. Okay. I think that's probably enough for pop. Right, pre-allocations, definitely one that customers use.
Yeah.
So as we know, we can book something, when we book something in, we can allocate a purchase order to a sales order, but we can't do anything unless it's booked in. So if you've got stock that's being shipped on a container, there's no way of being able to, what I call ring fence that stock item to that customer sales order to make sure that when it lands, that it doesn't get given to somebody else. I had a classic example of this. I always use this example where a customer was waiting for one item to come in from China. They'd waited 12 weeks for this one part to be able to ship something out to a customer, the whole of the order out to the customer. And guess what happened? Yes, the item arrived in. The warehouse team didn't know that it was for a specific customer order, and they gave it to another customer. So guess what? Customers jumping up and down. They can't then ship the whole of the order because they're waiting for this last item. Massive impact on cash flow, and it all kicked off. So what we basically do is we give you the ability to do what's called a pre-allocation. So it's simply ring fencing a stock item against a purchase order that's on the water or in the air when it's coming in. So when it lands, we know that that's for that specific order, and it then automatically allocates. Now, you can do this in one of two ways. If I come back to sales order processing, she says, trying to find sales order processing, there we go. So I can either do this at the point of where I put my sales order on. So let me think of something that's not a coffee machine. So, because I know I've got plenty of stock of coffee machines. Let's have a think of, So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put something on that I know we don't have any stock of, that I'm just trying to think if I actually have some. Let's add that on. Okay, right. I'm going to add one of those on. Clearly, I don't have any in stock. I've got the customer on the phone. I'm trying to take the order. What I then have the ability to do is ring fence that to a purchase order. Oh, sorry, I've gone and chosen one I don't have a PO coming in. That's foiled my plan. Okay, let me talk you through this. So let's imagine I had a purchase order on here. Sorry, Howard, it's just typical, isn't it? Best laid plans and all of that. Right, if I had some purchase orders, they would be listed in here. And very simply, what I could then do is say, right, that purchase order that's coming in, I want to ring fence this customer sales order to that purchase order. So when it lands, we just then have an extra little column in the standard Sage GRN screen that literally says pre-allocations, and it literally says the customer's order numbers that's ring fenced to. And I book it in, and as I said, it then automatically allocates that pre-allocation for you. So you're not having to do a secondary process, it just does it all in one go for you. So that's one way. If you want the people to do that whilst they're putting the sales orders on, I think it's a really good way of, being able to tell the customer, look, I can see there's a PO coming in, let me ring fence that for you. And, we know when that's coming in because it's been ticked as a received, it's been ticked as a confirmed rather. The other way is that you just simply get the order on, and you'll see now, if I just get this order on, bear with me, that there is also the ability, sorry, ignore all of these extra pop-ups. We have so many different applications. The other way is that I could be responsible for deciding who gets the pre-allocations. So in here, I can say, show me a specific stock item, and I'm going to decide who actually has that. So I can create the pre-allocations in here and decide which customer gets that item. So there's a couple of ways of doing it really, but it's really ultimately about saying, I want to ring fence something that, oh, sorry, I've just gone and closed that. I want to ring fence something that hasn't arrived in stock yet, but ensures that when it does arrive, we've ring fenced it. So our stores know that that specific purchase order line is for X customer. And of course, as you can imagine, it then avoids any embarrassing conversations, of course, with the customer. Yes, there's been many of occasion that I've talked to customers that go, yes, we've had that all the time, or the salespeople go and pinch it, not realizing it's for somebody else. So you
one
control
of the big things
that.
of stock management, somebody walking out of the warehouse with something, and 8 to 9 times out of 10, it's the MD.
Yes. Right, so that's pre-allocations. You also have the ability to change fulfillment. So if you've got on a sales order, I don't know, direct delivery or from warehouse, this is just an easy way of being able to change fulfillment if you wanted to. Okay, so that's the other thing as part and parcel of pre-allocations. Right, I kind of talked about reserves and call-offs a little bit, haven't I? So essentially what we do with reserves and call-offs, as you saw when we ran MRP, is it's literally reserving stock for a customer that perhaps hasn't given you an order yet, but you just want to have visibility that that customer has requested that you keep by that stock. So again, in true Blue Peter style fashion, as they used to say when I was a kid, here's one I've prepared earlier. So I've got a reserve stock of that cable gland for Abbey Retail. So we know when we look at our stock history that we don't actually have all of the stock for the cable glands because we've reserved one of those for Abbey Retail. When the customer then places the sales order with you, we can then allocate that reserve and generate a sales order. So I'm not then having to manually put in the sales order. It's just going to generate a sales order in standard Sage stock for me. So it's really about having complete visibility of any reserve stock and generating the sales order. But of course, for material planning purposes as well, as you saw earlier on, we're taking into account that reserve stock. So that's the first thing. The second is about keeping control of sales and purchase contracts. So if you've agreed specific rates with your suppliers, all you're doing is keeping a list of the items that you've agreed and the terms and the period. So during that period, I've said we'll buy 100 of each of those items. That's the price that's been agreed, and it's just keeping track of how much is remaining, what's on order, what's been received, and what's been invoiced. Now, if it gets to nearing the supplier's lead time, and of course you haven't purchased the quantity that you've committed to, it will include that in material planning for you as well. Now, we also have the reverse on the sales contracts. So if you've agreed specific rates with your customers, you can set up a contract whereby, again, it shows what's balance remaining, balance on order, what's been dispatched and what's invoiced. And when we add an order on, it will automatically pick up the price that's been agreed for you. Okay. Right. Whizzing through now, warehouse replenishment. I'll come back to stock management in a second. This, if you've got multiple warehouses, this is just a very simplistic way of transferring stock between your warehouse. And we can import this information, by the way. So all we're doing is we're creating a list of items that we want to move between our warehouses, basically. And we can then print a picking list, and we're just simply doing that stock transfer. Now, the extra bit with ours that I think a lot of customers tend to find quite handy is that we show that it's in transfer. So I think the disadvantage that standard Sage has is that you lose the visibility when you're moving it from one warehouse to another, whereas we show you that it's in transfer between the two locations until it's received at the other end. Similarly, if you want to replenish specific stock locations, so we have a really simplistic way of being able to say, so it's kind of like consignment stock. So if I wanted to have a minimum stock level at certain warehouses, and we've use that stock, this is a simple way of being able to say, right, I'm now, sorry, it would help if I actually put in a quantity, would it? I'm now going to transfer to keep my minimum stock that we've said of, in this case, the flowers. We always want to keep a certain amount of stock. So in this example, these guys had multiple retail locations, and they always wanted to make sure that they kept a certain amount of stock in each of their retail shops. So this provided them with an easy way of keeping account of how much had been used and how much they then needed to replenish in each of their retail shops. So that was basically the scenario that these guys were using. Right. Last one, stock matrix. This is great. I don't know if we've got any, sorry, excuse me, any organizations that maybe have different sizes or different variations of SKUs. So in a nutshell, all I've done in the background is I've set up a little matrix that says we sell jackets and we sell different variants to include a different size, different color. Now, that can be any number of different variants that you can call whatever you like here. And it's then created a grid for me with all those different variants. And I can then generate those as a stock item. So if I'm selling a new type of jacket, as an example, I can say, right, we sell that jacket in all these different colors and all these different sizes. Instead of me having to set up all of those different variants of stock items in Sage, I can literally just generate my different attributes here, and it will generate however many different variants you have of that. When we then add that onto a sales order, if you bear with me 2 seconds, bear with me, let's come into SOP again. We have a quick way of then adding that sales order on through the stock matrix screen. So let me come and add on Abbey Retail. So we've just added in at the bottom there, bear with me, a little matrix button, which then pulls through the different things that we sell. And then all I do is say, right, I need to put an order on for 3 of those, for 2 of those. So imagine I've got the customer on the phone, and instead of me adding these lines individually, I literally just use that grid. No, I don't want to edit any of the lines for prices or discounts. I could do that here if I wanted to. So actually, let's put that in so we don't get the on hold. £5, £5, £5, £5. No, we don't want to give any discount. So that's now added those 3 lines on for me. Obviously, I can add extra lines in if I wanted to, but it's just so much quicker than me having to manually add those lines on individually. And of course, much, much quicker than me having to create all of those separate SKUs with all those different variations. So I think my time's up, Howard, and I've probably gone over time. My apologies.
We got a lot covered. I'll put it to you that way.
There was a lot.
Yeah. And look, what I'd say is, look, I'm conscious of time myself here. I noticed there's no questions come through in the chat. If you do have any, feel free pop them through right now. And even if we don't get back to you sort of here on the actual call itself, we'll respond back to you anyway, regardless. And like I said, if it's a case that you have any queries whatsoever, please feel free to send them through. You can see my email address there. Some of you already have it already, and we can organize a separate direct session, and we can just listen to you, hear what it is that is the big requirement for you, what's the stumbling block you have currently, if you do have one, and we can nominate the correct solution for it. There's no charge on that. So look, all that being said, look, thanks very much for your time, Sarah. You did get through quite a bit, in fairness to you. So, and look, that's thoroughly appreciated. So, guys, thanks very much for jumping on today. I hope we answered some questions for you. Hopefully, we've started up some new questions for you. And look, like as I say, look, we'll be in touch if you have any other queries anyway. And thanks again.
Thank you very much. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.